What's good, everyone? This is the All Facts podcast here. I'm your host, Horace McCarr, and we are doing another episode of The Future. And for this, we have today one of my professors at the University of Guelph, Professor Ruben. Care to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Harris. I'm so happy to be doing this podcast. So, my name is Ruben Burga. I have my PhD in organizational leadership from the management section of the University of Guelph. I have an MBA from a university in the States and a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from University of Toronto. But my passion really is teaching about sustainability, about management principles, and entrepreneurship. So everything that relates back to doing good in business going forward.
So you're kind of qualified for a lot of things. So you have your PN, you also have your PhD. What made you choose out of the two like different fields?
That's such a great question too, because sometimes people fall into their careers and other times they kind of choose it. I would say for me, it was an interesting journey. And when I look back and I say, why am I actually a professor? Why am I actually at the university? I look back and I have to look back all the way to the point where I was a kid because I was the eldest of five kids and I was older by quite a few years. So all the time I was thinking about mentoring and teaching my siblings about different things altogether. And then when I graduated with an actual engineering degree, I went into industry and I spent a lot of time teaching adults about how to integrate different engineering things into their work lives. And then gradually, as I became more senior, I was getting into commercial and business development. So I ended up doing a lot of teaching, I guess is what you would call it, to my subordinates, to other people in various countries about how to do commercial development and business development. And eventually, at a certain point in time, you go through various career changes. I was in entrepreneurship, I was in
Mhm.
senior management. I decided, I've done quite a bit of traveling, I've done quite a bit. I'd like to share this some more. And I decided to go and start teaching. And I started teaching at a college level initially. And I said, well, this sounds like a good career. I actually enjoyed the teaching part of it. And I also enjoyed the research part of it. And I was looking to see what do I need to do to actually be successful at this. And one of the things that I needed to do was to get my PhD. So at a
Mhm.
relatively senior age, I went back, got my PhD, and since then I've been teaching at the University of Guelph. And I guess that would be the story of how I got to be where I am.
Yes, and what research do you specialize in? Because you talk about how, yeah, you love doing your research and you love kind of teaching. So I think you, in the beginning of this, like before we started, you talked about being in social entrepreneurship. And I have worked with you, so I know a bit of the research streams. So, but to tell the audience, what type of research do you specialize in, and how do you see that research impacting to the future of this world?
Yeah, that's another great question. So part of the teaching is taking some of the research and sharing it with the students and then learning from them. As you mentioned, entrepreneurship is an important part of who I am and what I've done and what I research. I spent a significant part of my career, probably about 15 to 20 years of my career, in entrepreneurship, actually creating new businesses, evolving new businesses, managing them, creating new products, and so forth. So that was the practitioner side of things. As I went into my PhD careers, I started researching how entrepreneurship can actually make an impact. And that's where you get into social
Mhm.
entrepreneurship. And that stream of social entrepreneurship, it stems off from that whole universal drive towards sustainability, which, as you can imagine, is a very existential question right now. With all the fires going on all over the world, we go back and say, how did that happen? And that goes back to sustainability. But sustainability is not just about the climate, it's about social conditions. And that's where social entrepreneurship is so important, because you're creating a business that makes an impact on people now and also in the future. And as I'm working towards making sure that this research benefits not just the students, but people around me, I'm trying to put in the scaffold, the ingredients that students will use to actually be better people in the future. And I would create businesses that impact everything in a positive way. So that's the environment, the social environment, and governance.
Yeah, so on the topic of entrepreneurship, you said you've been creating impacting businesses and developing them a lot further, which, if you mind telling us, which business have you developed or created like that has been the most successful so far, and what did it contain, and yeah, how would you see it in the future as well?
How did it impact the future and so forth? Well, one of the first
Not how to
businesses.
impact,
Mhm.
not how to impact the future, just yeah. So just which one was the one for you that you thought was the most successful and you thought could be sustainable in the long term?
The very first company I started with was a major specialty chemical company. And we started out, and you were talking about 35 years ago. Back then, we were working towards eliminating solvents in whatever people are doing. And solvents are very toxic to people, toxic to the environment. And we had designed the technologies to eliminate the use of toxic solvents in industry. So
Oh,
that
okay.
was super impactful, because in those days, 35 years ago, you probably won't remember, you're probably not more than 35 years old, but you could go to a garage and mechanics were cleaning their hands with gasoline and with solvents, trichloroethanes, which in the short term cleans their hands, but in the long term penetrates their skin and causes long term damage. So we were designing solvents, not even solvents, we're designing chemicals. And nowadays you can probably think of them as the ones that smell like orange or lemon. Okay, they have a special ingredient without solvents that actually cleans off greases. So that's one of those types of things that made such an impact. And then as we're going forward, people were assembling all kinds of things, electronic things, okay? I'm talking about TVs, I'm talking about computers. And they were trying to figure out, how do we put all these things together? Um, and when they were putting it together, back then, they had solvent-based glues, contact cements, and they had solvent-based
Really?
plastics. And all of that is actually toxic to the interior. So if you're familiar with a computer, it has a disk drive. If you have any kind of solvents, the outgassing makes the disk drive stick. So that means your disk drive dies. So we were designing things that made it non-solvent, that made it easier to assemble, that was not toxic to users, and that made things cheaper and better to make. So if you're thinking about impact, this is one of these things that in that very first company that I worked with 35 years ago, it laid the ingredients for what I was thinking about should be important in the future with sustainability. And later on, I worked with other companies that were using things like light energy as opposed to ovens, for example, but using light energy to assemble things, using light energy to fuse things together. So this was in the early days of laser. And nowadays we have lasers everywhere. But in the early days, we're designing things like LED lamps. Okay, LED lamps is not a big deal. Everybody's got them. But 20 years ago, nobody had them. So we were some of the first ones to put them together to assemble a sustainable way to illuminate low energy, high efficiency systems. Lots of fun back
It's
then.
actually kind of, yeah, it's actually kind of crazy to think that 20 years ago the world was very different, and you've kind of seen it with your own eyes, right? But the fact that you've seen kind of the past and turn into the present. So how do you see the present going into the future, turning into the future? You're kind of, so you've seen the past, you've seen the insane exponential growth from
Yeah.
like 2000 to 2020, 23. But if you were to look
Yeah.
at the world, or if you were to look at even in
Yeah.
terms of like businesses, entrepreneurship, and kind of sustainability of the world, how do you see the world in like 10 years or 20 years?
It's such a great question because you don't realize how fast things move. So I'll give you an example. 32 years ago, I was based in Hong Kong, and there was no internet. So the way we communicated was via telex. And then while I was in Hong Kong, there was one internet provider that allowed you to send text messages across the world. And then you go 10 years later, the iPhone starts coming in. And then
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, with the iPhone, we start having immediate global access to everything. And then very quickly, you think back 10 more years later, like now, we've got 5G networks. We have instant availability of information, which back then was impossible. Now we see, communicate, do everything instantly. And technology is just an extra appendage to what we have. So, us in the business world, in the management world, we have to learn how to harness that. So, you asked me a
Mm-hmm.
question as to how do I see it in the future? Well, what I can see is that certain things don't disappear. Human passion, human creativity, and human innovation will always be there. But with
100%.
AI, artificial intelligence, and that's just a big word, but in fact, it means any of these either natural language processing systems or instant access to different kinds of information allows you to make these decisions much quicker. So I can see that in 10 years, you're going to have marketing people, you're going to have accounting people, you're going to have engineering people, basically using their creativity but much quicker because now they can actually write it down quicker, get all the right ways, the processes all done correctly from an external and natural language processing system, some kind of AI, and putting it together much more quickly. You can see today how
Mm-hmm.
quickly you can do amazing images using computer information. So imagine how fast that can be in the future. But the one thing that all these computers can't do is it can't give you that little spark of innovation, of creativity, and of actually interacting with other humans to create something really neat. So I think humans are still going to be around, no question about that, but there's going to be a lot
Mm-hmm.
more smart uses of AI.
Yes, there 100% will be like smart uses of technology in general, because with technology growing at an exponential rate, and even when you look at AI, for example, I was talking about this in the other podcast that I recorded actually, that you look at AI last year and you look at
Yeah,
AI this year, you see there's a major difference.
amazing.
And a
It
big part of that is due to the smart uses of technology. And when you were kind of responding to that question, it actually got me thinking that I've never seen anyone be more excited about the future as other, because normally when I do talk to people about
yeah,
the future, they'll just say, okay, a lot of things will be digitalized. Here, a lot of the jobs, a lot of things, especially in the next 5 years, maybe,
yeah,
everything will be mostly digitalized. If you are kind of don't know how to have to have simple use of technology,
yeah.
you'll kind of be held back in the past. And I feel that when you brought up that, okay, humans will of course humans will still be around in like hundreds of years.
Yeah,
We know that
yeah.
humans will be around. However, a lot of the times people are saying, "Oh no, we're just getting lazier, lazier," because we'll have so many things doing things for. We'll have so many technology just utilizing its
No,
skills
yeah,
for us. We may not
yeah.
be like, especially when you were talking about back in the day, with the uses of the gasoline on their hands. It
Yep.
was penetrating their skin. It was cleaning their hands. But now they don't necessarily need to do that, because
No.
what on the trajectory the world's going at right now, they could
Yep.
easily just build a robot, or they're trying to build like robots or any
Hmm.
type of digital like human movements that
Hmm.
can do it for them.
Yeah, you think about this whole transition. In 10 years, the internal combustion engine is going to be a minimal amount of the engines out there because by legislation, within the next 10 to 20 years, we're supposed to be going towards electric vehicles. So that whole issue of lubricating and using
Hmm.
greases is probably going to change. And, I don't agree with all those people who say that digitalization is getting to the point where people won't know what to do. I just think back to what did Steve Jobs do? He saw a problem. People were trying to communicate with machines, and he said, you know what? Let's make it simple. Let's use a mouse. Let's use 2 clicks. Let's use whatever it takes.
Hmm.
Very, very simple thing. It's going to be the same thing. For example, we're communicating right now through a medium that gives us two-dimensional, but what says that right now I couldn't put a glove on that actually allows me to simulate certain things on your screen? Okay, that's again, it can be done. It's all data. And basically, I think humans are smart enough to decide when it's important to use technology. And particularly right now, at this
Yes.
existential stage where the world's going to be affected by everything that's going on, we need that processing power to help us model what's going to happen. You need to do that. So it's I'm
Yes.
excited what's going to go on in the next 10 years and where you're going to be in 10 years. I'm really excited about that.
Well, that honestly should be a quote that you just said that humans should be smart enough when to use, knowing when to use technology. That should be a quote right now, right here. Yeah, one of the wisest quotes from Professor Reuben out here.
Thank you.
So, actually, so when we were talking about how we're communicating through a medium, through
Yeah.
Microsoft Teams, right? Uh, it really gets me thinking about, VR, right? VR,
Yep.
AR.
Yep. I do.
It's getting me, yeah, the fact that all these companies such as like Google, Alphabet, Meta, they're all trying to develop VR to the point where you can kind of communicate as well through the person. However, you are not physically at the
Hmm.
presence of the person, but you can see them, communicate with them, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's probably gonna change the game a lot, I would say, for businesses in general, because number one, meetings. If you're working remote, you could kind of put on a VR set and then could pretend to be there, and even businesses such as in general, you could if you were, let's say if you're having a consulting firm and
Yeah.
you're doing it at home, you cannot meet your client in person. You can easily just use the VR and meet the client like through VR. And
I agree with you.
VR
That's
actually is
Yep.
getting to, yeah, I would say later on.
Hmm.
I actually talk about this a lot. I don't know if you think of it, but you can let me know on what your thoughts on these are. But a lot of the times when I think of VR, I'm always thinking that it's, of course, okay, VR stands for virtual reality.
Hmm. Hmm.
People will use virtual reality and then they could use their consciousness
Hmm.
onto a BCI connected to a VR,
Hmm.
so that they could kind of, if they were to die in this
Hmm.
world, they would be alive in the virtual world. And
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
kind of the trajectory I see for
Hmm.
VR.
Yeah, that's a big step. But just to go back to something you said about VR, so one of the challenges today is a lot of our virtual communications is 2D, two-dimensional. So with VR, you can change that to a 3D interaction, which is
Yes,
important for
yes.
social activities. You get 3D interaction. The next step of actually retaining the consciousness, there are applications where you can download quite a bit of a person's verbal, the phonetics,
Oh
their
yes,
thoughts.
AI voices generator. Yeah.
Yep, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so that after you die, you can always have a conversation with somebody who was not there. The consciousness part, that's
Through
something.
VR though, not normally. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Now, the part about whether you can transfer your soul, that's another question. That's more a philosophical
Yeah,
question.
that's
It's a religious question.
100%.
Yeah, but there's certain things to be said for having a conversation with somebody that, or with a voice that is familiar to you, okay, rather than somebody who's
Hmm.
died, with a voice that's familiar to you, knowing full well that that is not necessarily the person, but it is an embodiment of the person. So, without getting too philosophical, it's an interesting proposition and maybe something that could be explored.
Yeah, well, it is kind of being explored right now by the big companies, really. I was talking about Meta and Alphabet.
Yeah,
But yeah, now that we're talking about on the topic of emerging technologies and the world's trajectory,
yeah.
so I would to ask you again, with the world becoming more tech-based, which type of technology are you curious about to see emerge? And I know that's kind of vague because there's multiple different ones, but which one are you most excited about, or the one where you're kind of very skeptical on?
Okay, so the one I'm most excited about is the technologies that are able to provide enough information so that somebody who is going through deafness, blindness, or any other sensory deprivation can actually compensate by having that information transmitted to you. So let the
Oh
blind
yeah.
people see, the deaf people hear,
Hmm.
let them participate fully. And what's stopping us really a lot of times is just bandwidth. There's just so much information to be manipulated. A, what is the right information? And B, do we understand enough about the human part of the other equation to be able to, like in the Matrix, plug yourself in and be able to feel what's going on? So that's what excites me, how to address a lot of these accessibility issues. What troubles me is the misuse of things like AI. So passing
Hmm.
off a fake storyline and saying that it is written by a human when it is not. Deciding to do something in, let's say, in an organization because an AI program says it is the best thing to do. That's what scares me because it removes the human element from decision making, which is something we try and do right from the very start in year one all the way through. We try and say, don't forget the human element when you're making decisions. It's not just an A plus B equals C. You have to consider A plus B equals C, why? And how does it affect everybody else? So I guess that's the way I would answer both sides of your question.
Yeah, for the part that troubles you, I kind of feel that it relates to your job as a professor,
Yeah,
because a lot of the times you may give assignments, you may give yeah, exams, tests to your students, and
yeah.
you don't really, I don't know if you've kind of thought of this, but you don't really know if it's actually the AI talking or if it's them because they could actually utilize it for those reasons, right?
That's always a challenge as part of the professor world, the faculty world. What you and it's partly our own fault. Before AI, you could ask a question and be reasonably certain that the student would answer the question. Now, what we have to do is adjust our assessments. So we're asking you critical questions because critical questions are
Hmm.
the ones that allow you to think, and then we can really evaluate your thinking, which is related to whether you've achieved the learning outcomes. If we just ask you to repeat something that maybe the textbook said, who cares? Anybody can do that. And when you're in business, nobody's asking you to repeat what's in the textbook. They're always asking you, so how are you going to do this? How are you going to implement this new entrepreneurial venture? How are you going to
Hmm.
make success out of whatever it is you're doing? They're not asking you to go to a textbook. They're asking you, how do you apply it? So, yes, there's a transition that we're going to have to go through at the education level, just like in the business level. There's going to be a
Hmm.
transition as to how to use AI ethically and properly.
Yes. Okay, so now that about we talked about, yeah, the minor consequences of teaching while the students have great accessibility to technology, then I would say how would the advancement of technology help you on your impact to teaching?
So the access to technology is actually a really important part of my teaching because it will inform me as to the most relevant ways of doing business. Business right now is always at the leading edge of anything. So, for example, entrepreneurs are always trying new things all the time.
Hmm.
By the time we learn about them in academia, it might be 3, 4, 5 years out of date. But by using technology, you're able to be up to date on what's going on. So, researching current information in the through the web, for example, or accessing through various other media and forums and communities of practice allows me as a faculty to be able to give current information to the students. And that can be anywhere from current videos from main speakers. If Steve Jobs was alive, if Elon Musk was accessible, all those kinds of speakers that are really relevant to the students understanding what's important in life. So I think technology is a great tool to assist me going forward.
What are ways that you will use it for to like help your teaching? So, for example, would you would use AI to,
Yep.
like, I don't know, be some sort of teaching assistant? You can kind of have your own AI bot if students have any questions. Well, yeah, what kind of innovative ways do you think it will help you?
Going forward in the future, you can think of what is right now natural language query systems. What are they good at? That's what we call AI. Because when it first came
Mhm.
out, the whole word AI to me was a little bit of a misnomer. Artificial intelligence says that first of all, there's intelligence, and number two, that it's not real. Okay, so skip that whole AI thing. Let's think of it structural natural language queries systems. They're the ones that create chatbots. Okay, what's the good thing about
Mhm.
chatbots? It works relatively quickly on an existing base of information. But
Yes.
if a student is asking a question that is not from an existing base of information, the chatbot should be able to contact me and say, hey, here is a question that I don't have an answer for. Because you're right, Harris. There's a bunch of questions that students will ask that will be the same year in, year out. Maybe 50% of the questions will always be the same. And those questions, there should be a bank of answers. But there's always new questions because if you provide new material, you'll have new ways of looking at things. So that's where the AI bot has to get back to me and say, hey, here's a new way of a question was asked. Would you like to answer it? And I'd say, great. This is amazing information. It teaches me what the students are thinking about, but it also allows the student to get either a live answer or a way of saying, this is a professor talking now. Okay, the chat bot could be I don't know, the grad assistant bot, if you want to call it that way. But always from the ethical viewpoint, you, the student, has to know, am I talking to a bot or to a person? The same way as myself, I should know, am I talking to a bot or a person? Because then it allows you to know, okay, I'm talking to like on Star Trek, I'm talking to the computer. Computer, where am I right now?
Mhm.
Okay, or I'm talking to the human. And with the human, you ask more introspective questions.
Yeah, I think I would be able to tell from the two because although the computer really tries to replicate the human, but I would say that if I was talking to a human, if I know the person myself, I'd probably pick up on like certain words that they would say on normal sentences. But if I was talking to a computer, it'd probably be very sophisticated. They'll say words I probably don't know, or they'll say it in a way that just it doesn't make sense for a specific human to talk like.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I don't know, if the programmers are smart enough, they'll tell the chat bot to talk in layman language. So make sure they don't talk in a complicated way. And again, I think it's just ethics that you, as our student, should always know whether
Hmm.
you're talking to a human or to a robot. I know some professors who talk like robots, and I know some professors who are perfectly human in their conversation. So, I think you though have to know, and the same way we should know, because then honesty is all about it's all about honesty. If you're honest with each other, you can learn from each other, regardless whether you're asking a computer how to do things or you're asking a human. You expect different answers, and from the human side, I expect to hear something that's critically thinking, that's introspective, that's really refreshing, that tells me who you are and how you relate to the world. I don't
Hmm.
expect that from a chatbot.
I would say you were one of the professors that, or you are one of the professors that don't talk like a robot. It's a human
Well, thank you.
interaction.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, if you were wondering if that was you, no, I was just clearing that. Like, no, that's not
Exactly.
you.
It is not me. It is my robot, my alter ego.
But actually, one thing, so you've been teaching, you've been a professor for quite a long time. I would say, like, when you were getting to be a professor or along the
Yep.
years, what was your biggest fear of being a professor, and how did you get rid of it, or do you still have it, or do you hope to get rid of it in the future?
That's a really good
What is it?
question. Um, it's a really good question. For me, my biggest fear is that I am not able to reach everyone because everyone has a different way of learning. Some are more visual, some are more graphic visual, some are more text intensive, content intensive, and there's
Hmm.
different motivations for learning. So when I started out, my biggest fear that I would be teaching, but maybe 20%, 30% of the class just wouldn't get it because I wasn't showing it in a way that they could get it. But over time, I've realized that it's almost impossible to get 100% satisfaction. There will always be some people who get it, and always be some people who don't get the way I teach it. And then when the next class I teach it differently, it'll be the reverse side. The other people who did get it
Hmm.
don't get it anymore. So I figured, the best way to address that, the way I address that fear, is to try and make sure there's a feedback section at some point or another, either throughout the class or on a regular basis, to check and say, all right, let me stop now. Are we comfortable with where we are? And it's usually easier in the smaller class to get that feeling because in a smaller class, people are not so afraid to put up their hand. In a big
Hmm.
class, 100, 200, 400, it's a lot tougher. So there, I more or less have to look at body language and see, okay, are people getting it? Are they engaged? Are they not engaged? And sometimes people are not engaged because they have other things going on in their life, and that's okay. I'm not there to force them to be engaged, but I should be privileged that you actually do show up and are engaged. And that's, my privilege as
Hmm.
being on the other side. But yes, to go back and say, my fear is that I'm not able to address everyone. I'm going to miss out somebody. And it's always the same fear every semester. And it's until I get to know how the class is, until I get to know the individuals, then I get to realize, all right, this is how you learn. This is how you learn. Here you don't care. Here you care, and so on. So what would you call it? It's a get to know each other situation.
Hmm. Would other professors you've spoken to have the same issue?
Yes and no, it depends. Some professors are more focused on their research, so their projection is more towards here's what I've done, or here are the research I'm interested in, and I hope that you also are interested in it. But the professors who care, there's a whole community at Guelph, the Teaching and Learning Network, made up of professors who care. And that's, I would say, the majority of professors at this institution do care about the teaching and learning. It's more a minority that doesn't
Hmm.
care as much. And when they don't care as much, it's more because there's a disconnect going on. So the ones I speak to, they belong to my community of loving students and loving what the interface is. So within my community, we have similar fears, and we're similarly traumatized when we see that there's not enough engagement because people don't care or people are not really getting it. We try and figure out what is it we're doing? What do we need to do to make people care and make people get it? Because in the end, if you're able to get it, then when you graduate, then you can use that. If you get it just for a little bit and then you forget it, then it really wasn't worthwhile. We want to make sure that the learning outcomes stay for a long, long time.
Actually, yeah. So now that we're discussing like being professors and stuff,
Yep.
one thing I'd ask you is that if you were to meet yourself
Mm-hmm.
about like 10 to 15 years ago, what advice would you give yourself? Plus, if someone who said came up to you and said, I want to be a professor,
Mm-hmm.
what advice would you also give to them?
So I would look from two sides, the human side and the technical side. So on the technical side, I would say make sure you have a very rich silo of information, because if you're going to teach, you should be teaching from a place of learning. So whatever it is you want to be a professor of, make sure that you really are comfortable in that world. That's number one. That's on the technical side. And then on the human side, you have to love to share what you have with other people. So that means you should take every opportunity to get in front of people, in front of two people, three people, five people, doesn't matter how many, and try and give just a little idea and see how are you transmitting it. Are you doing it in a way that is helpful? Look at YouTube videos, look at Vimeo videos, TED Talk videos. Look at the formula that they're using. They're trying to find ways that something will stick in your head. Sometimes it's just a rule of three. Say 3 points and only 3 points. Sometimes it's don't talk for more than 5 minutes and then have an activity. Other times is have an activity right off the bat and have people learn through the activity. So all these human tricks, so to speak, they're all human training, human interaction situations where you have to work on the side that you're dealing with people. Because in the end, that's if you're a human being, that's what you will be doing for about 50 years, 60 years of your life. The technical side, just keep making sure you are up to date on the technical side. So you combine the human and the technical side, and together you'll have a good situation. And again, if I was looking back and saying, how do you get to be a professor? Well, first of all, in Canada, to be a professor in an institution, most times you have to have a PhD. Right there's a commitment.
Hmm.
If you want to teach at the college level, most times you should have at least a master's or a very deep specialty in something. Those are those are the areas that you really have to focus on. Does that kind of address what your question
Yes.
was? Okay.
Yes, yes. Because there could be someone listening in and who will be like who thought like, oh, I'm pursuing a PhD or I'm pursuing a master's or because for you you said it wasn't you didn't really necessarily think of becoming a professor. You just kind of just wanted to learn about you just wanted to learn about what you're interested in
Yep.
and then it just became something because you really like teaching. But there could be someone
Everybody's
out there and the same
yeah.
thing, the same
Yeah,
journey.
everybody's journey is totally different. Mine was a long journey. I spent 25 years, roughly 25, 30 years in industry, and then the last 10 years in academia. So, my journey is that way. For other ones, I've got some good buddies who went right from undergrad through to graduate school, through to professorship, and they're happy doing it that way. So everybody's
Yeah.
journey is a little different. You got to pick the journey that's good for you.
Yeah, all right, yeah. And one thing I'd say is that where I'm done asking all my questions to you, and I'd like to give you the floor for any questions you like to ask me.
Sure. So I'd like to ask you, what is it that students like to see in a professor, to the student viewpoint?
Okay, this is, I wasn't expecting that. I don't know if you want the student input. I thought you would already know.
No,
Okay,
no.
okay.
See,
So I would
I
say,
only have one viewpoint. I have my input. I don't have
yes,
your
yes.
input.
Well, back to like the feedback system you were talking about, I would say that would be very helpful because that is kind of a way for students to communicate with the professor, saying that, oh, I'm struggling at this. Can you address this more? I'm doing well at this. Thank you for that. So what students typically would see in a professor, for me, it'd be different, but it's subjective for everyone. But for me, I'd say three things, just three things. One, how much effort they have to interact with the class. Because some professors I have, like they'll just say like, okay, this is what you need to do. This is the assignment is due tomorrow, and they'll just throw the assignment to you. But
Mhm.
some the good professors I've had is that they'll talk about it. They'll say, okay, you run it down, like you run these assignment into these five different steps. I want this from me. I want this and this and this. Make sure to include that. And yeah, so number one is how much effort they have to interact with the class. Number two is really how they are personally, because I'm pretty sure you remember when I was your student, and I probably will be your student in some other classes.
Mhm.
Most after every class, I remember I was always going up to you and asking you questions about what we learned in class. Like, do you remember that, right?
Mhm. Yes, I do.
Yes. So yeah, no. So the reason why I would say that is because I like it when professors address different topics and they just talk about different ideas and different perspectives, and it gets me thinking, and then it makes me want to actually talk to the professor more because I want to hear more of their viewpoint on things.
Yeah, good point.
Yes. And number three, it's really this kind of feels, or this kind of is a weird thing to say, but it's kind of just how I feel when I'm in that class. Do I feel that I'm
Ah.
learning, or do I feel that for me, do I feel that I'm learning? I think, is this the right environment where I'm open to learn? Although I really love, like, I can say I love learning a lot. But yeah,
Mhm.
you probably weren't expecting that. But especially in the
No.
class, I would say that
Mhm.
we were
Mhm.
at,
Mhm.
I like the environment of it, and then what
Mhm.
you were teaching, and then what the activities you made us do. It
Mhm.
made me think that, okay, this is a great environment to learn, and I enjoy being at this place.
That's
So yeah,
excellent.
so
Yeah.
number one was
Yeah.
kind of how much
Effort.
effort the
Mhm.
professor
Mhm.
chooses to interact with the class, and number two is how the professor gets me to think about different ideas and different perspectives, and number
Mhm.
three is the environment of the classroom. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really good points to have. And again, as you said, and I agree with you, it's subjective, the same way that my thinking and my views on being a professor are also subjective. You ask another professor, they'll probably have some slightly different views. But you know,
Hmm.
it is great. It is all about a relationship. The more you build one-on-one with your professor, the better you will end up, and vice versa.
Yes. Yeah, I always try to get good relationship with my professors. So
Hmm.
it'd be
Hmm. Excellent. Well, thank you.
all right.
Thank you for
That's
sharing.
done.
All
So
right.
do you have any more questions?
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for the
All
opportunity to
right.
invite
Okay.
me on this podcast.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about though? Because
No,
we've
I
touched on a
think
lot of them.
yeah, we've touched on quite a bit of things, and you know, we went and talked all the way from sustainability through entrepreneurship, through teaching itself, through artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence is important, through our own experiences. So
Hmm.
I think that we've covered quite a bit of stuff for a podcast.
Actually, one thing I'd ask you,
Sure.
because you're big on sustainability, it's one of your research streams as well.
Yeah.
We know about the UN SDG,
Yeah.
Sustainable Development Goals. Which
Mm-hmm.
one, or I don't know if you remember them off the top of your head, but which
Yeah.
one kind of resonates with you, and which one do you want to like see
Yeah.
the way see the world should put more effort into?
Yeah, it's a tough question because as I've talked about before, the way the SDGs were developed is almost by committee. So they had different task forces
Hmm.
working on each SDG, and sometimes addressing one SDG will interfere with another SDG. But I think there's one that really is fundamental to almost every other SDG, and that's the one that relates back to quality education. Okay, I think that's SDG
As a
4.
professor, you would have to say that.
Almost, but I think about, what's happening in places like in Afghanistan. I'll use an example. Women are prevented from learning. That is a not a one generation impact. That is a multi-generation impact on the whole quality of life. You've got more than half the population that's been affected that way. And then
Hmm.
education in itself allows you to be able to interact with other people across the world. So education is, I think, fundamental. Allows you to learn about how to improve the food system. So education addresses the SDG 1, 2, and 3 all the way through well-being. It helps you develop infrastructure for innovation, which addresses the higher SDGs 9, 10.
Hmm.
It addresses how to work with climate change, SDG 11, how you interact with nature. So without education, you wouldn't know how to deal with life under the water, life on land. You wouldn't know how to set up partnerships. You wouldn't know how to talk about negotiation. So for me, that's almost a scaffolding fundamental SDG. So I think that's for me, it's probably most important.
It's actually great how you were able to use one and just connect all of that. You
All of
said,
them.
okay, we need quality education.
Yeah,
And because of this, what does this lead to? It leads to all of these other issues
and it
combined.
does. Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing.
Or it leads to the solutions. Yeah, it's it. All right. Well, yeah. Well, yeah, that's all I have to say for you. And I'd like to thank you again for taking the time and taking your effort to talk and well, for talking to me on this podcast and everything. I really appreciate that. And also for the audience, let me know what else you want me to discuss about. And as well as you should also thank Ruben. I'll 100% put his contact information on the description. And if you like it, share it with others, post it, do anything with it if you really liked it, or you think anyone else can benefit from this, or you think anyone else is going into teaching and education, maybe send them this as well. And yeah, that's all I have to say. And Ruben, do you have any final words before
No,
we leave?
thank you so much. Thank you to you, Harris, for doing this podcast. Feel free to send it to me so I can share it on LinkedIn so I can bounce it off to everybody else who's listening. It's great to continue the conversation, and I do appreciate your time. I appreciate your support all the way through. And as you said, you'll be in my class and either working for me or with me in the near future.
All right, yeah. By the way, this is the end of the episode. I'm Haris Vikar, and I'm out.